The United States has placed a 17% tariff on tomatoes imported from Mexico.
Tomatoes are being hit with a tariff. Yesterday, the U.S. announced a 17% tariff on all fresh tomatoes coming from Mexico.
You ever smell a tomato? That vine-ripened sweetness? That earthy snap off the stem? Yeah, that tomato just triggered one of the biggest shakeups in North American trade history. Because get this, Mexico just said adios to the U.S. tomato market, handing a $2.8 billion opportunity to Canada. And what triggered this juicy fallout? A single policy decision from Washington. But wait, this is about more than tomatoes. It's about tariffs, trade wars, worker livelihoods, and whether your next taco will cost 10% more. Let's unpack it. Here's the full story, because it's a lot deeper than tomatoes. Mexico's tomato industry is massive, almost $3 billion a year in value. These aren't just backyard veggies, they're a cornerstone of Mexico's agricultural exports, supporting hundreds of thousands of jobs and supplying over 2/3 of America's fresh tomatoes. But this summer, a seismic policy change hit. In mid-July 2025, the U.S. reinstated a hefty tariff, starting at 17%, with some reports putting it as high as 21% on fresh Mexican tomatoes. That's not just a paper push, it changed everything. In response, Mexico pivoted. Hard. They redirected their export strategy straight toward Canada. And that, my friend, is a trade realignment decades in the making. This isn't just about tomatoes. It's about who controls the flow of fresh food in North America, and whether the United States just handed Canada a fresh competitive edge. So, let's anchor this in time and space. The chain reaction started in April 2025 when U.S. officials signaled dissatisfaction with a long-standing suspension agreement that limited tomato dumping allegations. By July 14, 2025, that suspension agreement was officially dissolved, and the U.S. Department of Commerce dropped the hammer. The primary tomato-producing regions in Mexico, Sinaloa, Baja California, and Querétaro, had long relied on the U.S. as their key buyer. Now, trade channels are being rerouted to Canadian provinces and even overseas terminals. This is real-world geopolitics playing out on a tomato truck. It started subtly. In April, quiet murmurs in Washington hinted at policy reviews. Then a formal notice emerged. The U.S. was reviewing the suspension agreement from 2019. By mid-July, the Commerce Department made it official: withdrawal from the agreement and implementation of steep tariffs on imports. What happened next? Mexico didn't wait. President Claudia Sheinbaum picked up the phone, starting direct negotiations with Canada's Prime Minister, Mark Carney. Trade officials got to work. New agreements were sketched, and exporters, like Veggie Prime in Querétaro, adapted on the fly. They'd been shipping 100 tons a week to Canada-based Mastronardi Produce. But when the tariffs hit, they paid the fees up front, absorbing the loss while simultaneously renegotiating deals to reflect higher costs. One Canadian distributor agreed to a 10% price bump. Another wanted volume guarantees. It was chaos, but it was also fast adaptation. By the end of July, over 15 major Mexican producers had partially or fully reoriented their shipments toward Canadian partners. And Canadian retail chains, like Loblaws and Metro, welcomed the influx. Why? Because they saw what was coming before most Americans did: supply gaps, rising prices, and fewer fresh tomatoes in U.S. supermarkets. But why did this even happen? Why would the U.S. choose to disrupt a $3 billion supply chain? It comes down to one word: dumping. American tomato growers, especially in Florida, have long accused Mexican producers of selling tomatoes at artificially low prices, undercutting U.S. farms. For years, there was a suspension agreement to prevent price suppression. But U.S. growers argued that it was toothless. They lobbied hard, and in 2025, the Commerce Department agreed. So, in a move meant to protect domestic agriculture, the U.S. imposed tariffs to level the playing field. But here's the twist. Mexico doesn't just grow tomatoes, it dominates the year-round supply chain, especially in winter months when U.S. fields lie dormant. So while the tariff aims to help Florida, it may end up hurting American retailers and consumers even more. Meanwhile, Mexico saw Canada as a safer bet. Both countries are aligned under USMCA, both are seeking to reduce dependence on U.S. politics, and both are facing increasing food inflation pressure. So Mexico made its move. So what happens now? For Mexico, estimates suggest tomato exports to the US could drop by 5 to 10%. That might not sound huge, but in human terms, that could mean up to 200,000 job losses across farming, processing, and transport. For American consumers, tomato prices are expected to rise 8 to 12%, especially for cherry, grape, and Roma varieties. Think salsa, pasta sauce, ketchup, even your fast food burger is about to taste more expensive. For the supply chain, companies like NatureSweet, who rely on a steady cross-border flow, are warning about impending shortages. 70% of fresh tomatoes sold in the US originate in Mexico. That's not a small leak in the system, it's a rupture. Now here's where things get really interesting. NatureSweet's viral campaign, Associates Under the Label, project let consumers scan a QR code and see the face and story of the farm worker who picked their tomato. Emotional, viral, humanizing. It's a subtle but powerful clapback to US protectionist policy. They didn't just renegotiate, they used this moment to push into new branding strategies in Canadian supermarkets. Think premium labeling, sun-grown in Mexico, marketing, and direct-to-consumer crates. Some producers are eyeing Asia, particularly Japan and South Korea. The challenge? Air freight costs are steep and shelf life limits make the math tricky. But the ambition is real, and whispers from Mexico's agriculture ministry suggest new cold chain infrastructure may be in development. As of early August 2025, the tariff system is fully operational. Mexico is mid-negotiation with Canada, and the results could set a precedent for broader USMCA realignments. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney is expected to visit Mexico later this month, possibly to sign a bilateral produce deal that would cement this new flow of trade. What's next? If Mexico locks in a long-term tomato trade channel with Canada, the U.S. may find itself increasingly isolated in its food sourcing. Domestic growers might gain some market share, but they'll be hard-pressed to replicate the year-round volume and flavor consistency of Mexican exports. Economists are warning. This isn't just a tomato war, it's a test case for what happens when trade gets tangled in politics and consumers are the ones left footing the bill. So there you have it, a policy change that was supposed to protect farmers, sparked a cross-border reshuffle, rattled jobs, and could change how your grocery store sources food forever. Mexico's $2.8 billion to $3 billion tomato industry is in transition. Canada might emerge as North America's new tomato powerhouse. And the US, well, it might have just priced itself out of its own dinner plate. What do you think? Is this a smart defense of local farming or a self-inflicted wound to US consumers and grocers? Let me know in the comments. And hey, if you found this eye-opening, subscribe for more deep dive trade breakdowns, because behind every product in your fridge, there's a story worth telling.